Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of a video series done by my friend Patrick Honcoop and myself, Shane Thomas. This past week, we released a report called The Precision Revolution, Foundations of Precision Spraying in Agriculture, which dives deeply into precision spraying, everything from the likes of John Deere's See and Spray to new startup technologies like Tech to overviewing some of the large incumbent agribusinesses and crop protection companies like BASF's One Smart Spray and what they're doing in the space. And so we wanted to do more of a video, audio overview of what's in the report and really dive into a couple components from the report today. But before doing that, want to give it over to Patrick to introduce himself briefly.
Thank you, Shane. Really excited about the report and about our series to discuss about the report. My name is Patrick, and my background is more in the equipment space. So coming from the equipment space, worked at Claas, major equipment provider from Europe, where I was leading the technology and the digital activities. So also worked on data platform for Claas, as well as introducing new technology into the market, both in Europe and in North America. Always fascinated by new products, by new technologies, especially that are really like game changers. And at Claas, I've been working as an independent consultant now for almost 3 years to help these AgTech companies advise on how to bring these technologies to the market. So always also excited about not just the product, but also then how to commercialize it. And next to that, also doing work with corporates to help them understand technologies like what we discussed today, a major innovation like precision spraying. So excited to discuss more about this with you, Shane.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I think, Patrick, your background is really key, especially when you combine it in with my background, where I don't have any equipment experience. I don't have that level of expertise. Where my background is in agronomy, crop inputs, ag retail, very different areas than equipment, of course. And when you look at the precision spraying and just spraying space in general, you need to have the equipment expertise, the precision ag expertise, and the agronomic and the crop input expertise. It really is that intersection of all of these different components of crop production coming together. And so when Patrick and I set out to put this report together, we really understood that our expertises and background complemented one another. And so we think it really tied into who we wanted to target with this report. And it really is a report for agribusiness professionals, those that work for AgTech startups in the crop input manufacturing space, in ag retail, in the equipment space, in the dealership space. And so really focused on giving those individuals a background and a foundation to build from for the precision spraying space, because we see it as something, to your point, Patrick, that it's going to be something that really is influential across all different areas of the industry and the ecosystem over the next number of years.
Absolutely. And I think what we also have seen also during the work is that it's really a critical technology that can have a big impact on the weed management in general. As you said, it really like brings these different technologies and domains together, but there's also a lot of unknown. And it sounds all very easy. Precision spraying, you have a camera that spots the weed and you only spray the weed. But then underneath, there's so much complexity in terms of making the technology work, but also the impact that it has in different circumstances, depending on all kinds of agronomic factors like weed density and so on. So I think it's definitely important to have that foundation to better understand the impact, but also how it's applicable in different circumstances.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think having that foundation and background is crucial. And I think, maybe just one more comment on the report before we dive into some of the aspects of the implications of the technology is when we were looking out at the space, trying to better understand who are the companies out there, what technologies are they using, what's their commercial uptake, how are they pricing. It was, you couldn't find it anywhere. And so we wanted to really go out there and look at the different companies, talk to the different companies, talk to farmers, and put something together that could be useful for everybody in this space to be able to piece things together and really have that foundation for moving forward. And so we're really excited to release it. And even I think what was really came to the forefront as we were just completing the report over the last 2-3 weeks even is it's moving so fast still. I think, AGCO has made new announcements recently on their Symphony offering. CNH just announced really some new features, new offerings around the Augmenta acquisition that now has its own name underneath CNH, and John Deere made more releases. And so tons of things changing, which is exciting. But I think that's where this came from. Is, hey, this is a baseline starting point for people that does go deep into different areas, but then can be built upon by everybody depending on where you want to go with it.
I think that's great. That's an important point. That also we haven't seen something like this in the industry yet, where you really have this fundamental and holistic view on the technology, as well as then also go deep in terms of who are the players, but then also what's the difference in regional adoption. We talk to all kind of experts also across the world to get a better understanding around the adoption and also adoption hurdles in the different regions. So I think that global perspective is also really important also for companies in order to understand how do they go into new markets and how does the technology work in one region versus another region.
Yeah, it's exactly. And I think that was, eye-opening for me, especially being very North American focused versus looking at Europe versus looking at Australia. And so it was really compelling to hear, especially when you look at, as we talk about in the report, the history and where it started in Australia and why the adoption there is maybe earlier and more rapid than in other parts of the world. So really interesting on that side of things. With that, maybe we'll kick it off into the one area that I think you and I are pretty passionate about, in that everybody talks about precision spraying and see and spray from hey, we're going to reduce herbicide use, we're going to reduce cost by 80%, 90%. I think we have a view that, hey, that is valuable. Of course, there's something to that, but there's so many more other things that are underneath the surface there that are valuable, can be valuable, and can continue to deliver for farmers and for different people within the industry. And so maybe with that, I'll kick it over to you, Patrick. When you think of, why shouldn't we just be focused on, hey, 90% reduction? Why is that just kind of the starting point versus the exclamation point, so to speak?
It's a great point, and we work on this and discuss this exactly this point at length, right? And I think it's at least twofold. Where I think that these claims 90% herbicide saving, they're just not real. Also because what herbicides are we talking about? And that's kind of also what we've seen in the research, that if you go deeper, like you have the residual herbicide, non-residual, selective, non-selective. So if you look at this broader bucket of herbicide and the program around herbicide management, what exactly can you save in budget technology? You won't be able to save on residual management or residual usage. So I think even there it is important to be more precise in terms of like which specific segments or items within the herbicide management you can target and you can save. And that's only on the comment on saving itself. Then if you look beyond the saving, I think the way more interesting aspect is also how it impacts yield, and how by not hitting the crop or limiting how much the crop gets, how much kind of yield can you get by there's no reduction in growth because the plant is not hurt by the chemical. So I think these elements around it make it way more holistic and more interesting for the farmer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the agronomist in me, my career basically was based upon telling farmers, hey, this herbicide is safe, or this won't hurt the crop. And I think it was always fundamentally some sort of a lie, just in the sense that a plant fundamentally has to metabolize a herbicide. And so if you're dousing the entire crop with the herbicide, it has to metabolize. And I always talk about the example of, I can take 5 shots of tequila and wake up the next morning and feel fine, be functional, be productive. But am I going to be as productive as if I didn't take those 5 shots of tequila? And the answer is probably, well, no, you're going to be more productive if you didn't take the shots of tequila. And I think herbicides can be looked at in a similar way, where that crop can be more productive if it didn't have to metabolize that herbicide, and it could focus on reproduction, it could focus on finding nutrients, all those different things. And I think it's especially pronounced when you start to look at when that herbicide is applied. And if it was under a more stressful condition, maybe it was a little bit of a water log, or maybe it was drought stress or heat stress or whatever it might be, and that just compounds those potential yield reductions. And there's some work that we cited in the report from Purdue University, where they showed the reduction in herbicide savings. I think in their example, it actually was something like 80% reduction in herbicide in that one specific example. But what was most interesting was the 7, 14, and 21, and they might even went to 28 days after application, and the herbicide injury index just was significantly higher in the broadcast application versus the precision applied or see and spray applied in that instance. application. And so really interesting aspect. And I think it goes back to this concept around precision spraying and precision weed control, is that these systems and these tools are more than just a reducer of herbicides. They are actually a Swiss Army knife agronomy tool where you can actually have a better understanding of the crop, and you can actually deliver a safer experience for that crop, and you can achieve better outcomes within that crop, meaning you can have better control of or weeds, for example, which I think is really, really interesting and something that is maybe not seen all the time today. Maybe I'll let you talk about that in a second, Patrick, of like today there's still misses, there's still challenges to managing some of these smaller weeds or under certain conditions that need to be managed. But fundamentally over time, it should be more about the better outcome that the farmer can achieve that really changes the ROI from just a cost savings to a yield and cost savings potentially, but maybe that isn't all of it, to even aspects of savings on fungicide or biostimulant or all these different things. So really interesting, but I'll maybe throw it over to you to talk on some of the things you found on misses and farmer apprehension around missing and those sorts of things.
That's also an interesting aspect, and also an aspect that's not really talked about, in my opinion. The technology is still, it's getting better and better. The AI that is recognizing the weed and so on. But if you imagine a sprayer driving 15 miles an hour over a field, then it's just very hard also for the technology to get all the weeds. And especially when they are, let's say, grassy weeds in a soil field that's growing, it just then for the AI hard to find them, especially when they're early on in the growth stage. So, and I think that's still an issue that we see, is that if you miss weeds, then you either have to go with an extra pass or you have to accept it, but then it will definitely also deplete your yield. So it has a negative impact. And I think these factors also need to be considered when you talk about the value proposition for the technology, right? Because if you're on the one hand saving so much, but you need to do an extra pass or you have some yield loss, that's then also kind of negatively impacting your ROI compared to if you talk purely about the savings. And I think that's in general also a topic around if you have a solution where, and maybe we go already very deep in this right now, but if you look at the crop protection management today of crop protection programs, then often, or in certain regions, you do these combined applications with, let's say, a residual or non-residual, or a combination of a herbicide with a growth regulator. If you no longer can combine these applications, you have to split these applications, which means you have to do one pass for the herbicide and one pass for the growth regulator, which also adds some cost, and also logistically, depending on the size of the operation, weather patterns, and so on, can be just challenging. So I think that to me was also in the research so fascinating, that you have so many of these factors that kind of you have to consider in order to really understand how does this technology fit in that specific farm, in that specific operation, with that level of wheat, and so on. So it's just very interesting to have this more holistic look to the technology, but then also how to position it in the market.
Yeah, I think it is really interesting too that I don't know if we go too deeply into this in the report either, but I think what you're alluding to too is fascinating when you start to compare, regionality of what does a European farmer value versus a North American farmer. What do they value, and how do they actually think about, well, you know what, I don't want to have any weeds in my field because I don't want the neighbor driving by and seeing it, or my landlord driving by and seeing that I missed the weeds and it looks bad. Even though it might not be economical to control it, it might actually be okay to have it there. Whereas in Europe, there's maybe more of a focus on being economical and not just spraying for the sake of spraying, or doing revenge spray, as we used to say when I was an agronomist. And so I think it's really fascinating to your point on, like, how do you position it, and then how do you position it in different geographies and based on the specific customer too.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Like in Europe, it seems to be a bit more a pragmatic approach, where they go more than for the economic point of view, and they're not as keen on the completely clean wheat-free field as in North America. So these regional nuances are also very interesting to also consider in terms of like the technology.
Yeah, no, and sorry, I kind of took it down a trail there, but I think to go off of what you were saying before too, with the different management practices and managing the ROI is just, even when you introduce this, we'll put aside other crop protection and fungicides or growth regulators for a second, but even how does this sort of technology really impact decisions and management strategies when you have a two tank system? So that would be the equivalent of what John Deere See and Spray Ultimate is today for everybody listening. Is, how does that actually change when you go out into the field? How does that change when you apply a herbicide, or what herbicide you apply? You were talking earlier, Patrick, on, well, are you applying residual-based herbicides, or is it a selective or a non-selective herbicide? And how does that actually impact the total ROI? And so it reinforces that there's challenges in the ROI calculation and figuring that out and positioning it and thinking about it. But then it's also, how does this change things like how a farmer manages those weeds and how many passes they do, and do they end up using more? And we won't get into this today because this is a whole different can of worms, but how does Jevons paradox play into this? And does it play into precision applications? And so there's a lot of different things to consider there. But I think that's what makes this whole space really crucial, to at least have a foundational baseline understanding of, so that you can start to think about the potential implications on your customers that might be farmers, or on your business, or even just for what the future of farming looks like, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I've also learned a ton again by working on this topic together with you, and also going deeper in the agronomy. I think the other aspect what's also interesting in terms of the capability of the technology is around, are you able to just differentiate and say, hey, this is the crop, let's say it's a wheat crop versus a wheat, or are you also able to identify specific wheat species? And then can you go deeper and say, I have a certain wheat type problem with wheat resistance and so on, so I can use selective herbicides, which are normally more expensive, but by applying them very targeted, it's now possible. So I think these also wheat management practice perspective is really interesting in terms of the opportunities this technology opens up. It curious to get your take on it, but from what we found, it also can really help in managing the wheat resistance problem.
Yeah, I think it's a critical tool to be able to manage that. And I think you hit it right on the head, where if you can actually identify the specific weed, you have a better understanding of, hey, you know what herbicide specifically could we use in that instance to either reduce costs, or, to your point, to get better control, or to better manage resistance. Or maybe that you have, I'll use Palmer amaranth as an example. It's Palmer amaranth in that specific patch there. That it shows up in a patch because the spray system and the cameras now can illustrate that. Exactly what weed it is. And now that you need to add an additional molecule or additional product to the tank to get a better or improved control outcome on that field or in that specific spot, which doesn't, to your point earlier, doesn't necessarily reduce costs, but it should actually deliver better upside for that farmer in yield, in lower cost management practices in the future, potentially. But it also can give you the better ability of, where do you go spot spray? Because maybe you go and just target one specific 5-acre area in the northeast of the field, and one small 2-acre area in the southwest of the field, for example. And so I think that's where it gets interesting. Whereas historically, it's like, I used to work with a reasonably large farmer in Saskatchewan, and he would tell me, Shane, if I'm going to go up to spray that field, like, I want to make sure that I know that there's enough weeds across the entire field to go spray it. So make sure you explain to me exactly where and how much is in each field, because I'm not going to go up there and spray if it's just one small acre patch, for example. Whereas now you can see that exactly from the sprayer, maybe in your pre-plant or pre-burn application. You can understand where that potential spot is and make a management plan accordingly. And we even see this in some of the product offerings coming out now. I think if you look at what John Deere is suggesting, is that, hey, they can also deliver a tillage recommendation based on things going on in that field from a specific weed or whatever it might be. And so I think it really starts to illustrate that these tools and these systems, once you put a camera on, once you make that equipment intelligent, so to speak, you can all of a sudden have better insight and make better decisions. And I think something that we'll get into in future editions is, how does that change the power dynamics in the industry of who has the information to inform a decision of a farmer and support that farmer in making that decision? It historically has been more of, on the weeds specifically, a ag retailer or a crop input manufacturer, for example, and now we start to see that shift towards the equipment dealer,
Yeah.
or maybe it's the specific bolt-on system company. So anyways, there's a bunch of different things that we can get into it at another time on it, but I think it shows the really cool complexity of these capabilities.
I'm already very excited to discuss that topic around the broader impact of this technology on the spraying ecosystem, and for example also how the OEMs will benefit from that by creating a stronger position in the application space. I think that that's really interesting. And I think that the point that you made also, it goes back to the value proposition around, okay, you have now cameras on there, you're collecting a ton of data, and that data can then also help you to make better agronomic decisions around crop protection, but also beyond that, I think. And it also kind of confirms certain like insights. I think somewhere in the report, we also have an overview around a test case where the farmer sees that around 70% plus of the weeds is in the headland or of the border of the field, and that's kind of, you already know, but now you really know. So I think that kind of confirms then also a certain gut feeling, but it also makes it more objective, which then, as you mentioned before, can be used for the following season or the following application to make it more targeted or change certain programs.
Yeah, it's really cool when you start to look at that, and I think when you can quantify it, all of a sudden you have a ton of potential to better manage that moving forward. And I think that's what, ultimately I get asked a lot, like what's the technology that you find to be the most exciting in the industry? And I continually find myself coming back to this not any specific one company. I mean, I could mention a few, but I think in aggregate, precision application capability of once you equip a AI-based camera onto a spray rig or a spray system, the potential is really huge. And I think what excites me the most about it is that it benefits the farmer. And it's not to say that a lot of ag technology doesn't benefit the farmer, but sometimes the value position is to the specific agribusiness. Sometimes it's really hard, or you have to stretch a little bit to find where the value is. What you and I are talking about today is there's so many different potential value propositions. It's about the farmer finding one specifically for themselves, but it shows that there's a ton of value, no matter the region, no matter the specific spray system you're in, no matter the crop you're growing, that there is a ton of potential for this, and the farmer can accrue the vast majority of the benefits. And we won't get into business models today with John Deere's approach versus AGCO's or versus Green Eyes or whoever. Yeah. But I think when there is value created for the farmer, that's ultimately what ag technology is supposed to be about, what precision technology is supposed to be about. And that's what, to me, and I think you and share your view, but what I think is so exciting about this technology as we look at it being more and more commercialized.
No, 100%. I think it's really great to see that such a technology has that great value for the farmer. And what to me is really fascinating is when I view the broader, almost agribusiness landscape, then usually it has been there's like the equipment space and there's the agronomy space. And now with this technology, it's also converging and it's coming together, because you need to know both. You need to know around the equipment and then the spraying and then of course the application itself, but then also, as we just discussed, really the in-depth agronomy knowledge and how that ties together. I think that's really, it also opening up new opportunities. And it is fascinating that these are now finally coming together as normally being very separated domains. Now, and that's definitely also a topic for another conversation, but it also opens up the complexity around the distribution, because suddenly you need to have experts that know not just iron or not just precision ag or not just agronomy. You need to kind of bring all these three domains together in order to come up with a good story to the farmer and really understand, based on that specific farmer, what's the best solution and how can I show the value to the grower. So I think that entire distribution piece is also really interesting and also something that we will discuss in another episode, what it means in terms of successfully commercialize big technology to the farmer.
Yeah, I think that's the really interesting part. And I think that also is, as much as I'm very bullish on this technology for the farmer. That is a crucial thing that needs to be considered when it comes to how successful will this technology be, because it is incredibly complex, because there are a lot of scenarios. You need to have a bunch of different expertises to really tie it together and make it work effectively for the farmer, which means collaboration is necessary between various players throughout the ecosystem and throughout the value chain. And so I think that's one of the really interesting aspects of it too. And so yeah, there's not a shortage of interesting things. Maybe we can leave it there. I'll throw it over to you for a few final comments if you have anything you want to share, and then I can wrap it up after that.
I think it was a great first discussion, and we already touched on a few points which we will discuss in future episodes, in future series of videos that we'll create around this topic, because it is, as we discussed, it's so broad and complex, but we believe it is really important to have that foundation, and really looking forward to having these discussions around the broader impact on the industry that this technology will have and is going to have, as well as distribution, and talk a bit more about the regional adoption. Probably we will also bring in some other speakers. So yeah, excited about the next episodes.
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to reinforce that you just said too is that everything that we have alluded to in this episode is touched on in depth in the report, whether it's the distribution dynamics and the strategies around that and the things that need to be considered, whether it's complement disruption and margin erosion and how that can play out because of technology impacting the input manufacturers, even getting into Jevons paradox and the potential to see increased volumes and all these different things. So we tackle a lot of different concepts. And so if there's any of this that is interesting, you can get the report or purchase the report at www.upstream.ag, where you can find it. You can see a preview of the report. You can shoot either of us a message on LinkedIn or email us. We'll have that in the post, where you can send us a message and learn a little bit more. But I think, to your point, there's a ton to this that is really compelling. And I think as we've launched this report, as you alluded to, guess is that we've had a bunch of feedback. And so we're excited to also bring on people that they're maybe not as bullish on precision spraying itself impacting the industry, and have a different point of view on what does the future of weed control look like and what should it look like moving forward. And so I think we're excited to get into that. And we didn't get into alternative methods like laser weeding or electric weeding or mechanical weeding in the report. Just from a scope creep perspective, you could all day add incremental aspects on. You could even put in hand weeding and roguing if you really wanted to get crazy, right? But fundamentally we put a stop to it at really precision spraying. And so with that, if you are curious to hear more about what's in the report, send us a message. We're happy to answer it. But like Patrick said, we're going to do more of these video series where we talk a little bit more about the different concepts from the report and really how it can impact agribusiness professionals moving forward. So can't thank you all enough for listening, and we're looking forward to hearing from many of you and looking forward to the next video edition.